Okay, thank you everyone for your response. And I would like to welcome you on the webinar on Revit 2016 to 3dsmax 2016 Best Workflow Tips and Tricks. My name is Dhanjeet sir. I work with Cadgroup Australia as BIM consultant. I deal with project consulting, product support and training for BIM and CAD products. Let me just switch my presentation mode. Okay, perfect. So basically I'm using a 3dsmax from DOS by 3 Studio release and I'm also a certified instructor for 3dsmax as well as for Revit products. Today's this is one of my favorite topic, and we'll be going through how to bring or Revit model in 3dsmax, and we'll talk about some of the tips and tricks. Plus we'll see some of the exciting feature in 3dsmax 2016. Today's agenda, this is a quick agenda. I'll be talking about how to Yes, I believe everyone can hear me now again. Sorry about this trouble. Perfect. Thank you very much for your quick response. So these are some of the points I have listed here. Is before going to export your model from Revit, these are a couple of areas we'll be looking at. So the 3D views will limit the geometry by hiding or deleting, and another thing we can do before export, we can use this one of the tool called person use. I believe every Revit users is aware of this. And we can create a camera views in Revit, and that will be 100% translated to 3dsmax. That's one of the enhancement in new releases of 3dsmax. In previous version they used to be slightly different, but now they support the same view. Inside Revit, if we are using some of the materials like maybe Autodesk material or custom materials, everything is translated through one of the process, so I'll be discussing soon. And lights, so we can have a correct solar orientation, and if we are using artificial lights, we can prepare, we can export these IS data as well for 3dsmax. This is a quick slide I'm pulling here to talk about what's the rendering differences between 3dsmax and Revit. Revit rendering, as we are aware of, they basically only support up to 16 cores. There is a basic animation export as walkthrough or animated solar study, and we have got limit effects, which will be especially if we need some of the, let's say, some glare effect or depth of field, etc. These are not supported in Revit. Whereas if I compare the other side, 3dsmax, we can use the unlimited cores for rendering. We have got quite a number of camera and rendering effects. There is a bit enhanced in quality and lighting settings. There are some third-party rendering support available for 3dsmax. The examples are like V-Ray or Final Render, etc. There's a exciting feature inside 3dsmax called batch rendering. That means we can have multiple cameras assigned, maybe let's say 5 or 6 or any numbers, and we can render in batch, so we do not have to wait for render to want to be finished and go for the next. So you can basically sequence the rendering in the batch, so you can leave it overnight, and once you're coming back everything will be done. The next another feature in 3dsmax rendering is called distributed rendering, which is it's kind of to render a single image you can use multiple computers, which is definitely is not possible with Revit. So imagine if I'm rendering 6000 by 6000 pixels with the maximum high quality, and one computer might take maybe 8 hours. We can use this distributed rendering technology to render one single frame utilizing any number of computers in the LAN environment. There's another feature called network rendering inside 3dsmax, which can render number of frames, or let's say the animated sequence, using multiple computers. And one 3dsmax license can give you up to 999 computers to be used. That means even if you own one copy of 3dsmax, you can install for multiple computers without activating it, and there is a software called Backburner which enables 3dsmax to render without opening the software. That means no license is required. Now I'm going to talk about some of the export options from Revit. If we see a bit of history, we used to use DWG or DXF. I'm sorry about that. It's supposed to be DXF, which basically can export a geometry information. And the problem with that was they cannot export materials or lighting information or environment information like sun position, etc. Later Autodesk introduced called suite workflows, and they're using a format called FBX, which is the data which keeps the geometry information, materials, lights, and environment settings. So overall I can say the FBX export is preferred compared to any other formats. Inside 3dsmax they support some other formats. In fact, you can open Revit file in 2016 version. You can use DWG or DXF link. You can also use SAT formats to be linked, and FBX link or import option. It's just a quick slide talking about 2016 version of 3dsmax. There used to be two different flavor of 3dsmax in the past, called 3dsmax and 3dsmax design. Now in 2016 version they combine in one single product, so they just call 3dsmax 2016. That means whatever the features, extra features they used to have in 3dsmax design, like lighting analysis or civil view, these are incorporated within the 3dsmax 2016. .3dsmax is used for various industry. So this is one of the slide I'm just talking about. 3dsmax is was well known in games or TV films or for advertising, and of course was utilized in architectural, but now we can see this can be used in many different industry. So it's not limited to one industry. And in 2016, when you start your 3dsmax, this is where you're gonna select whether you want to start with a classic interface. That means they will just load the classic way of working with 3dsmax, or something called design presets, where most of the settings are based on design visualization industry. Now simply go through the demonstration phase. So let me just switch to Revit. So this is one of the file I have which is done with Revit. If I look at the overall 3D view, so this is one of the complete model done with Revit. This is small. This data is provided from Autodesk, and let me just switch to shaded view. So it's a pretty small kind of hospital or healthcare center, and we'll see how to prepare this model for the better export options, because there will be a lot of data which we do not require to bring inside 3dsmax, just to limit the data. One thing I have to talk about this is some of the features are not supported, especially these RPC trees or these RPC models, because RPC used in Revit and 3dsmax are two different technologies, so they cannot transfer. I mean, they cannot just convert as RPC max objects. So there is a separate kind of RPC elements within 3dsmax. We might have to substitute that. So before exporting, we might want to remove that from the scene. And I will also use the section box, or let's say hide or unhide elements, to control the elements. First thing, I would always prepare to just use the person used. So if I'm going to use that, I have already did that, but just to let you know, like, we can person use before exporting, because we do not want to bring all the data. The next would be limited the view. For example, if I just want to render interior views for this particular area, let's say for the entrance, I might simply go to, let's say, ground floor plan, and there's a nice tool inside Revit 2016 is we can just simply select the area which you want to view in 3D view. I can just simply select that area, and there's a tool summed under view called selection box, which quickly creates selection box based on my selection which was in the plan view. I can simply just rename that. Say I'll just rename for this. Let's say I'll call as a exterior, and I want to use this for interior rendering, so I'll just limit this view. In fact, I can use some of the visibility graphics to hide some of the elements. So I'm getting the visibility graphics and say, okay, we don't want to, because since I'm just want to focus on this particular area, let's say for the entrance, I can limit the items by this controlling the visibility. So let's say I'm going to uncheck guessworks, some of the furnitures, so most of the furnitures inside this particular area has been hidden. Now I'm ready to export. The export option is simple. You can use export, and as I said, in the past people used to use DWG or DXF, which can transfer the geometry but not the material information or any lighting information. So I will stick to this option called FVX. Just to let you know, there's another way to use FVX is something called suite workflow. The advantage of suite workflow is it's directly create link and opens 3dsmax, and you can switch in between. The problem that I personally have used both of these, suite workflow and export functions, and what I found, suite workflow, it's the file size I compared with normal export and suite workflow was two different sizes, so I generally prefer to use export function of FBX. So I can hit the FBX button and I can, let's say, give a particular name and save this file. Okay, I want to give, let's say, something called new, entrance interior new, and hit save. So one push button will export this entire geometry. So it might take some time because it has to convert to FBX format. So I got a choices, not only one view you can export, but you can export multiple views. And as I said, the advantage of exporting model as a FBX is it combines the geometry, the lighting information, the environment settings, all of these. So it's still working. I believe now it's almost going to finish soon. Yes, it has been done. Similarly, I have created one of the 3D views which is called looking at entrance. This is for my visualization, and I have limited some of the geometry, and what I can do, as I said, if I have used some of the RPC elements, most likely I will hide that in view. So I can say hide by category, so all RPC elements, I can hide that before export will be a good choice, because this will not be visible. I mean, it will be visible in 3dsmax but not as the real RPC elements, but just as a proxy elements. I have already exported a couple of views, so next I'm going to 3dsmax and say I want to start a brand new files. One good thing about 3dsmax in 2016 version is we can start with a particular template. This is a pretty new features. So we can create a scene based on a template files. Right now they have got a couple of template files which is predefined here. So depending on the industry, I can use one of the template file. For example, if I want to visualize a simple product in a studio lighting setting, I might just use something called sample studio scene, and I can start from that particular template. We can create our own templates. For example, I have created a template file, something called CG design. So I'll just show you a quick opening file here. So if I have a simple one of the, let's say if I'm in furniture design industry, I will just have this environment, or let's say the predefined room with the all lighting setup done, and I'll drop the objects and change materials and quickly render the scene rather than creating everything from the scratch. For the previous project, I do not require to use template. I might just start with the new templates from the scratch, maybe using called original startup, which is something like start from scratch. To be able to use FBX formats, we got import option, and nice option we got something called link FBX, which will be a linked file from Revit in 3dsmax. That means we can go back to Revit, update the design, re-export FBX, replace that file, and once I use update in 3dsmax, all the model will be updated. So I prefer to use link FBX. I've already exported called entrance exterior new FBX. We'll just hit open. You got a option here to choose some of the presets, how to combine objects either by materials or by category or by family name or one objects, or do not combine. So these are some of the presets which are basically there is properties to define or modify. For this demonstration I'll be using called Revit by category. Sometimes I have seen the problems with Revit materials, so imagine if I got maybe, if there is around 80 or 100 materials, there will be 100 type of category of elements. So I'll prefer to choose Revit category because the elements naming convention will be based on category. So all the doors will be named as door category. So it will be easier for selections or applying materials or any other purposes. I'll hit attach this file. Now 3dsmax is processing to convert FBX data to 3dsmax data. It will be a quick one. And I got notification called daylight system creations. That means the daylights is being created, and they're asking to use this exposure control, which is the value is 15. I'll accept this as a default. This could have been changed. This can be changed later as well. Now we can simply see that very quickly they have 3dsmax is imported. Now if I select one of these elements and say if I want to create some of the cameras view, if we recall this particular scene, we have exported, we had exported with no camera view. That's the reason why the camera, actually there is a camera created, but if I export this particular, let's say looking at entrance, that camera will be created automatically in Revit, sorry, in 3dsmax. Now to apply the materials in the elements, there are quick ways to apply in 3dsmax. But before that, I'll talk about the material conversion. If we are using FBX formats, since Revit and 3dsmax uses the same material library, it's basically export everything as whatever the material configuration we have did with Revit inside 3dsmax. Just for a quick test, I can show it to you. So I'm going to rendering material. Let's say I can use both any of these. So I'm using one of the compact classic version of map. And if I had say pick this material from elements, they will start showing the exact materials which was created with Revit. Or let's test another one. So for example, if I'm looking at this particular element, let's say this particular slab, they have used a material name called roofs. So this is basically all the materials is coming from directly from Revit. There could be some chances, like if you want to change the materials, we can simply create in 3dsmax. The material definitions inside Revit and 3dsmax are pretty similar, but there's much more can be done with 3dsmax. A simple example would be if I want to quickly create a one of the, let's say one of the predefined materials we can select from. For example, we got this option, say we want to create a simple matte plastic. I can give a name and say use one of the template called matte plastic. This will quickly give me a quick material. I can double click to see the preview, and we can start changing the attributes, for example the color. So if I need maybe let's say a blue color, start changing the colors. And these are all called architectural and design materials. So as I said, this is coming as a presets. Apart from that, we got different kind of other materials we can use with 3dsmax. Is we have something called get material, and there are some special material from Mentoray, as well as we can select the Autodesk library, which is not listed over here. Let me select. So overall we can see these are all the scene materials which is basically coming from Revit. I have already created one of the scene with most of the materials applied. I will quickly talk about some of the renderings now. So I have one of the interior scene already created, and I have applied some of the materials. So I'll just quickly open that file and show you some of the features there. So it's the same file imported from Revit. I've spent some time changing some of the materials, and for 3dsmax it's not just to create a better rendering, but we can apply animations, we can add effects, or we can add some of the okay, let me just cancel this process. It looks like it's putting the plugin. Okay, so this is one of the finished scene I've used, and I've created a simple animation to that as well, where I can see some of the peoples are just in talking or in mode. Now I'll just switch to another camera we call interior animation. This is another simple camera movements I've created with 3dsmax. This will be just a quick presentation. Another view I have created is called balcony down. So this is one of the view, and I've just moved a simple camera, sorry, another simple animation. What I did basically is created a couple of materials which is not coming from Revit but it's substituted in 3dsmax. Now we'll see some of the features about rendering. In the rendering options, as we know in in Revit we have very limited presets there. In 3dsmax we have got a lot of different presets and different rendering engines. Right now I'm using a renderer, and the renderer what we're looking at is inbuilt with 3dsmax. There is no third party involved at this moment. So it comes with something called NVIDIA iRay, Mental Ray, Quicksilver hardware, or scalar rendering, which used to be the very traditional rendering in 3dsmax. I will use NVIDIA Mental Ray for this moment, and we can define the parameters, what the size we want to get the output for. So I'm limiting to 800 by 400 at this moment, and let's do a quick test rendering. So depending on the quality, so currently what is basically is using is the quality as a draft. So it might take a while. I'm just trying to cancel, show you a bit about the setting for the rendering, which we have here called global illumination. And we can define with the presets which can limit the time. So depending on the output, if I'm in test phase, I might just use the draft quality or low or medium for the final stages. Based on that, we can see these all parameters filled, which used to be manually in previous version of software. So I'll just use for the draft for now. We got other settings like the maximum trace depth, which can limit the rendering time. So if I'm using a low value, I can do pretty fast. So let's say I'm just going to use for 2 for now, the maximum refraction as 2 to limit the time. One another tab we have called renderer, where we can define the quality control. So there is a classic ray trace or unified ray trace. I'm going to use classic ray trace for now and using the minimum value as 1 by 4 by 4. This will be for a very quick draft mode rendering. So this might take a bit while to render. While it's rendering, I will quickly talk about the different rendering engine. As I said, there are a couple of different rendering engines in the market at this moment, like V-Ray or Final Render, and I've heard from quite a number of users saying, okay, which one, they ask me the questions, which one is best. My experience is, well, it depends on the output we are looking for. If you are looking for something very physically accurate, mental ray definitely is preferred. Whereas if you're looking for some photographic output, sometimes NVIDIA can also get a better output, or V-Ray as well. So while it is rendering, I will simply pull one of the slide to talk about one of the feature called physical camera. This is a very new enhancement in 3dsmax 2016. They've added a camera type called physical camera, and this is developed by Cadgroup, and they are the makers of V-Ray. The advantage of using physical camera, the parameters are based on real-world cameras. So if you have a bit of photographic, or let's say the knowledge of how photographic works, we can use all of these features here. So the rendering engine like Mental Ray or V-Ray, they all support all of the features of this physical camera. So I'll be showing some of the features shortly of this physical camera. I believe it might have finished, so let's switch back to 3dsmax. We're still on rendering. While it's still in rendering, I would like to show you another slide in to talk about the physical camera. In physical camera, we have a feature called depth of field, where you can control using the aperture, and in the left hand side on the top we can see like changing the value aperture as f-stop as 1.4, which has given a nice depth of field effect. At the bottom in left hand side there's an option called vignetting, where the value 1 has 1 and the next to that is the using value vignetting as 2. So these are some of the artistic effect we can simply get it quickly from 3dsmax physical camera. In the right hand side we have got the aperture type, like for in the depth of field parameter, where the blade size is like circular, or we can use, if I use the blade size of 5, it gives me a pentagon, or so on. Okay, let me go to 3dsmax now. Still computing Find and Gather. I'm using my laptop, so right now what we're having is a single laptop is being used. As I said, 3dsmax has a capability to use the feature called distributed rendering. So imagine if I have maybe 10 computer on LAN, I can distribute these all rendering algorithm in different computers, and they can process a single image rendering that might take less time. Unfortunately, I do not have the setup here, so we have to just wait for once it is finished. I might quickly jump to the final rendering while it is being rendered. So this is one of the pre-render scene from exterior. This is another scene. We have used some of the lightings. We can see the lighting has a glow effects. The vehicles are the 3D models, and this can be an animated sequence. The another scene here, this is the similar sort, has been rendered in 3dsmax, which has this glows effect, and you can see the patterns, etc. So these are all custom materials created within 3dsmax. Unfortunately, still on the rendering. I might stop this. I'm sorry, I might stop this. We have limited time, so I'll just cancel that for now. I'll quickly show you the feature for physical camera. As I said, the camera, let me enable the camera in the view. So if I look at the camera, we can see we got a new tool, something called physical camera, and this is that particular camera. I believe it's a target camera. What I'm going to do is quickly delete that, and I'll press Ctrl C in this particular view. So I'll change it to perspective and use Ctrl C, which by default they create something called physical camera. If I look at the setting on the physical camera, we can see it's totally different compared to the traditional cameras, where we have the presets like which is close to the real world cameras. If I'm using like a Canon APS-C model or maybe APS-H, so we can just simply click on that. That gives me the particular width, and all these parameters is based on this particular settings. There's a nice option here, is the bokeh effect depth of field. This is one of the pretty exciting feature which can control how the depth of field has been generated. Now there is a bit fair of other properties there in perspective controls, where if I have a scene, so I'm just going to switch to the full view and say if I have to use the tilt option, so we can start saying, we can, if sometime happens, if the camera is not tilted correctly, we can start looking in the viewports. Or let's say if I have to change the vertical tilt, or you can just simply check this box in the auto vertical tilt, which basically correct the camera automatically. One of the other features I'm going to talk about is, because since I have to wait a lot in the local rendering, there's another enhancement that's set called Autodesk 360-degree rendering, which is very similar to what we have used with Revit. So when you go to rendering option, we got this rollout here to use called Autodesk 360 rendering mode. Now I believe if you have used this before, or if you have not used this before, this is a similar concept as Revit. That means we can throw this model to to Autodesk Cloud, which is called Autodesk 360 Cloud Rendering, and we can start rendering online. So this gives us plenty of opportunity to work with design while it is rendering in the cloud. For right now, we can see the cloud credits. This is important to understand because before going to use the rendering, it depends on your cloud credits. You can choose the selections. For example, if I want to do a simple test rendering, I might just use uh, the default setting what I have. So for example, if I'm using the rendering quality as, let's say, standard, still I'm charged at 0. If I'm going further, let's say maybe for the best quality, and right now I'm using this very small size called custom size 640 by 480, still the cloud credit is 0. Now if I'm going to enlarge the size, maybe call, let's say, 9 megapixels, that's where it looks like it's not updating. It's supposed to update actually. Let me just have a quick check why it's not updated. Okay, sorry, we have to select the camera. So I might select the physical camera, and this is where they will start updating. So for example, if I use a normal small size, let's say 1 megapixel, they'll show me we are required to use 1 cloud credit. If I just use normal standard, still will be 0. So if I'm doing a draft rendering, I might just select a very simple normal setting over here and send in the cloud. Now what happens is if I click on render, so it's translating the scene, and in the background what it's gonna do is going to select this is a bit of a message they are throwing me. Is because if there is some of the texture map or if there's lighting information missing or something, they will give you all the warning, etc. And the file is being uploading, and once the upload is finished, they will start rendering. And if I select this option called notify me by email when complete, Autodesk will send you an email saying the rendering has been completed. And if you want to see in the gallery, we can switch to the particular link and we can have a look. And in fact, we can see the progress of rendering of these projects. So I've already used a couple of other files rendered in for my test purpose. So I can show you a quick one. Is I've already rendered a couple of scenes here. So this was one of the scene rendered in cloud. The advantage of using that, as I said, this is rendered in cloud, so it takes a fraction of time to render. And we got these nice options called render as panorama, or we can simply click on the adjust exposure, do a tweak, and we can save to cloud, or we can simply download. So I'm just doing a real-time exposure control. So for example, I want to enhance a little bit of exposure control, change up a little bit of highlight, a bit of midtones, make a little bit more intense in the shadows. I'm going to slightly boost the saturation, and I can hit apply. Now what happens is they're just going to rebuild the scene, get the render in cloud. So this is all happening online, and I can still continue working with my 3dsmax scene. So this is the advantage of using the cloud rendering. So it's still working here, and I can see the progress. As I said, since I have used email notification. When this is be done, they can send you the email notification. And there are ways to basically click on whether to use share the projects, or we can use the download functions. Currently it's been in process, so I do not have that option enabled. Once it is finished, I can simply check on download all. So if we have rendered maybe multiple views, we can simply download all of these images at one go. So while it's rendering, I will quickly pull my slide here to show you the resources available. So these are some of the links which might be useful. I've been using this most of the links. Sometimes if I require some extra resources like bitmaps, we got cgtextures.com. There's quite the other, we got aerowick.com for 3D models. These are some of the links there. For tutorials and plugins and references, there are this much of some of the links. So looks like it's finished, and if I click on that, so this is my finished rendering after changing the exposure control. So you can simply say, yep, I want to download the image. So you got option, you can download, and based on the selection how it was, whether it was 9 megapixel or 16 megapixel, it will have all the size done. So I've almost finished the content for today, and if there is any question and answer, please send me through. I believe you can enable the audio. I'll be happy to hear you, and you can ask me questions, or you can send me in the chat window. So any of the questions, I welcome you all to throw any of the questions you may have. So as I said, you can unmute your audio, and if you have any of the questions, please ask me through. We got another 5 to 10 minutes time. So I can't see my question window. I'll just minimize this. Sorry, I'm having trouble looking at the question just because of display problem. Let me have a quick questions. Okay, I've got a number of questions here. I'll go through one by one. Okay, could you go to second last slide of 3dsmax resources, please? No problems. I'll do that for in a second. Is it better to bring in FBX than RVT in 3dsmax? This is a really good question. Yes, I would prefer to use FBX rather than RVT. The reason behind that is if we are going to let's say open RVT file in 3dsmax, they can only open the host file. They cannot bring the linked model. That is one of the limitations so far I have found. But imagine if I have a Revit project which has a host file and having quite a number of links, and if I export as FBX, everything will become one single file. So that's an advantage of using FBX rather than RVT directly. I've got another question. Can you export from Max to Revit? Well, from Max to Revit, uh, because Revit can only certain formats like DWG or DXF or SAT or SKP. These are the formats they can import. So 3dsmax can export as SAT format or DWG. So I believe we understand there will be a bit of data lost. That means if I'm using a DWG export from 3dsmax, none of the material will come to Revit if I'm using import in Revit. That means they can only read the geometry. Okay, I'll just get this slide on as well so that you can take note of it. So any other questions? Still I can wait for another 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, so far I can see there's no more questions. This is just a quick another slide. I have got another webinar coming up on July 15th. I'll be talking about Revit XT, which is offering tools for Revit users and only with the Cadgroup customers at this moment, or is available to buy as well. So if you want to know about this Revit XT, if you own these tools, you may want to join us on July 15th. And below is the email addresses. Either you can send email address to me or to Catherine. She will be coordinating or send you the invitation details. So once again, thank you everyone, and hope you'll have a good afternoon. And we'll hope to see you in next webinar. Thank you very much.